Could a global mud flood have occurred in the middle of the 18th century? One that submerged an old empire and gave rise to many more. The global mud flood of Tartaria. Wait till you hear this. Architecture around the planet, partially submerged and with striking similarities. This is the global empire that has had its existence wiped from the face of the earth, literally. And relatively recently too, the lost global empire known as Tartaria, whose advanced civilization was allegedly erased from mainstream historical narratives, and a cataclysmic mud flood in the 18th or 19th century that altered the world's power dynamics. This enabled the rise of European empires. While such theories have garnered intrigue, they lack substantial evidence from academic or archaeological sources. However, modern day great floods have occurred, such as the Great Flood of 1862. This was the largest flood in recorded history of California, Oregon and Nevada, and it inundated the entire western United States, portions of British Columbia and even Mexico. So the idea of a relatively recent mud flood is not unbelievable. Tartaria, or the Great Tartary, was a real geographic term used in European maps from the 15th century to the 18th centuries. This described a vast region in Central Asia, encompassing areas of present-day Russia, Mongolia and even parts of China. Historically, it referred to lands inhabited by nomadic Turkic and Mongolic peoples, such as the Tatars. However, alternative historians suggest that Tartaria was not merely a loosely defined region, but an advanced global civilization with sophisticated architecture, technology and culture. Some do argue that this civilization was deliberately erased from history by European colonial powers. This was to consolidate their dominance. Some researchers do point out architectural anomalies, such as grandiose structures in regions where such sophistication is deemed unlikely, given the conventional historical timeline. These researchers also highlight the depiction of Tartaria on old maps, suggesting it was an organised empire. Proponents of this theory argue that the narrative surrounding Tartaria was suppressed through systematic historical resets, including wars and engineered disasters. The mud flood theory is another cornerstone of this narrative. It posits that a global or near global cataclysm occurred, burying advanced civilizations under meters of mud and altering the architectural and cultural landscape of the entire planet. Some researchers cite buildings with partially buried windows and doors below ground level, and excavated basements as evidence of a flood of mud that engulfed entire cities. According to this theory, this event led to the loss of Tartaria and paved the way for European empires to rise unchallenged during the Industrial Revolution. Mud flood theorists often point to photographs and illustrations from the 19th century showing urban excavations as well as architectural styles like Greco-Roman and Byzantine structures found worldwide. These structures were not built by the societies that are traditionally credited with building them, but instead these buildings are remnants of the advanced Tartarian civilization. Evidence for this includes maps from the 16th to the 18th centuries that label parts of Central Asia and Siberia as Tartary. This suggests a once significant entity. Many researchers, however, do say that this was a geographical term rather than a political designation. Claims of its erasure from history arise from the disappearance of the term Tartary from maps and texts after the 19th century. Architectural anomalies including structures like St. Petersburg's Grand Palaces and the monumental architecture of cities in North America, Europe and Asia. Proponents argue that these buildings display a level of sophistication and technology that is inconsistent with the societies that allegedly constructed them. Photographs and accounts of buildings with submerged lower levels or half-buried facades are cited as evidence of the mud flood. These phenomena are often attributed to urban development, changes in street levels and sediment deposition over centuries. And what about the suppression of historical records? Supporters of the mud flood claim that a deliberate suppression or rewriting of history by European powers occurred to obscure the existence of Tartaria and other advanced pre-modern civilizations. A global mud flood of this magnitude would leave clear geological markers such as sedimentary layers across the entire globe. However, no such evidence has been identified in the geological record, leaving many to speculate at the lengths that the European powers went to cover up this disaster. The rise of European empires in the 18th and in the 19th centuries can be more convincingly attributed to historical processes such as industrialisation, colonisation and technological advancements. While the mystery and intrigue of this theory may captivate the imagination, rigorous evidence and scientific inquiry remain the cornerstone of understanding the past. In cities like St. Petersburg in Russia, Istanbul in Turkey, and parts of Central Europe, there are numerous buildings with windows or doors at or below ground level. These features are often attributed by proponents to a mud flood that raised the ground level around the structure. For example, some historic buildings in St. Petersburg show multiple levels of basement windows that appear to be partially buried. Mud flood theorists argue that these were initially at ground level and became buried during the mud flood. In cities like Seattle in the United States and Edinburgh in Scotland, there are well documented cases of raised streets. For instance, in Seattle, Seattle's underground network, which is now part of the tourist-orientated Seattle Underground. This resulted from a deliberate effort to elevate streets after the Great Seattle Fire of 1889. While mainstream explanations cite planned urban development, mud flood theorists interpret this as evidence of buried cities during the mud flood. Edinburgh's Old Town, particularly the area of Mary King's Close, has subterranean spaces beneath modern streets. These are explained as historical adaptations to changing urban landscapes, but mud flood theorists see them as evidence of a covered up past. Structures like the St. Isaac Cathedral in St. Petersburg, the US Capitol building in Washington DC, and older European cathedrals are cited due to their monumental scale and the apparent presence of buried features. In many cases, what is visible today as basements or ground floors might have been exposed ground levels in earlier designs. Theorists of the mud flood often ignore mainstream architectural and historical explanations, such as changes in street level due to sedimentation, flooding and deliberate urban planning. Theorists of the mud flood ignore these mainstream explanations and describe them as a load of rubbish. Historical photographs from the 19th and early 20th centuries showing urban excavations are often presented as proof of a mud flood. For example, images of workers digging out buildings or streets are interpreted as uncovering structures buried in mud. These photographs often show cities like Paris, New York, London, Glasgow, and even Edinburgh during periods of construction, renovation, and redevelopment. Anomalies like massive mounds of dirt, exposed foundations, or hidden lower floors in older photos are key points of interest for the mud flood theory. In places like Venice in Italy, where frequent flooding has partially buried thousands of older structures, the mud flood is said to have occurred here. Chicago too famously lifted entire blocks of its downtown area in the mid-19th century to install a proper drainage system. Images of construction or excavation from the 19th and 20th centuries often show cities undergoing major transformations. The Industrial Revolution may have been a cover-up for this massive transformation. Of course, the Industrial Revolution brought massive urbanisation, with projects to install sewers, expand railways, and modernise infrastructure. Could the Industrial Revolution really be a cover-up for the global mud flood? What do you guys think about this? Comments below, and thank you for watching.